The nominees for Best Fantasy or Science Fiction Film of 1929 are High Treason, The Mysterious Island, Woman in the Moon. 1927 had been a fantastic year for film. 1928, much less so. And 1929 was a garbage fire. The worst year for cinema in the entire age of feature film. The culprit, of course, was sound. Requiring not only new technology that was far from stable in 29, but new skills and new artistic philosophies. No one knew what they were doing. Films of the fantastic didn't escape the problems of that transitional age, but they were better than average. Though here I'm talking as if there were many to compare. There had been few fantasy or science fiction films in the previous years, and 29 does not change that trend. There was no supernatural horror, and nothing that falls under the popular definition of fantasy survives. China did create martial arts films, many lost, but the silent red heroine does still exist, and has fantasy elements. The swordswoman flies into combat and appears in a puff of smoke, although she could have just run and jumped as far as the effects on the film are concerned. Is that enough for it to count as a fantasy film? Not really, and it isn't of high enough quality where I feel I'm missing something if I ignore it. So, knocking out supernatural horror and fantasy, that leaves only science fiction, a rarity in cinema history as it is normally far outnumbered by the others. But then there are only 3 science fiction films. Well, there were 4, with the extra being the Hollywood-produced midstream, but all that survives of it is a brief section where the main characters watch an opera. The rest is lost. That means, like in 27, my nominees are chosen by default. High Treason from Britain, The Mysterious Island from the US, and Woman in the Moon from Germany. And 2 of those had huge effects on the future of science fiction and on the world, not necessarily positive ones. I'll start by discussing the one that didn't. High Treason. Released as both a silent and a talkie, High Treason takes us to the future of 1950. In the silent version, that is. In the talkie, it's 1940. Who needs consistency? The political situation is tense between the Federated States of Europe and the Atlantic States. A secret cabal of financiers is working behind the scenes to cause a money-making war, while a large pacifist organization strives fanatically for peace. In these difficult times, soldier Michael Dean romances Evelyn Seymour, daughter of the leader of the League of Peace. He's also the son of the president, but that goes nowhere. Really, he seems completely unconcerned about his father one way or the other. High Treason feels like a British attempt to make Metropolis, because it was. And like Metropolis, the art design stands out, once again giving us an Art Deco future. Also like Metropolis, the plot gives us a romance between undeveloped characters, while more vibrant side characters backstab each other. And it tries to be an allegory, giving a blindingly simple answer to complex issues, while also containing some troubling political sentiments. Though unlike Metropolis, there's no way to claim it's a case of being naive. It starts with Noel Pemberton Billing, politician, of course with that name, also a sometime inventor, and author. He had a history of anti-Semitic statements, saying that German Jews were trying to destroy Britain. He also blamed sexual deviancy, particularly homosexuality, for the downfall of British manhood, and that there was a secret black book filled with the names of important people and their perversions that was being used to blackmail them all. And he wrote a play entitled High Treason, which was, very loosely, the basis for the movie, which he also, in part, financed. Billing's messaging is in the film, if you know to look for it. Guess who the evil cabal of financiers is supposed to represent? But it's not clear if you don't know what to look for, and I doubt most of the audience noticed. And there wasn't much of an audience anyway. It created barely a ripple in England, and as far as American consumers go, it might as well never have existed. Showing a disdain for Billing, the New York Times review stated, Mr. Billing's drama had a run that was short, but not sweet. It was laughed out of court. Why a filmmaker should imagine that a play which was a failure should make a successful talking picture passes ordinary comprehension. The theme of peace versus war is very broadly expressed throughout the film, though I don't think either it or the romance will be of much interest to modern viewers, nor to viewers in 29. Rather, it's the world building. FaceTime, a channeled tunnel long before one existed in reality, electric banners everywhere, fencing exhibitions in the middle of a dance, costumes which have a certain zing, Art Deco towers, halls, and doorways, and reasonable gender equality with both female politicians and female soldiers who can be drafted. And to go with that, I didn't mind the film's obsession with cute women showering, changing uniforms, and even having their clothes disarrayed by an explosion. But it is exploitation film level of noticeable. I can't recall another film where male military recruits are ignored, but female ones are followed. The talkie was missing for years, but was recovered, and now both versions are available through the British Film Institute, though they decided to release the silent one with no soundtrack, and silent films weren't meant to be watched in silence. Since my first Rocky viewing, some YouTubers have come to the rescue, giving us a couple unofficial scores. None are great, as they don't seem to have been written for the film, so don't follow it as well as a score should, but still, a huge improvement. So if you want to watch the silent, go to YouTube, not the BFI. My next two nominees are only slightly better known to the general populace, but they've left their marks. I'll start in Hollywood with The Mysterious Island. It's part 2-strip Technicolor, part tinted black and white, part silent, though with music and sound effects, and part talkie. Sound complicated? It will get much more so before we're done. Jules Verne's book of the same title was a sequel to his novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. This isn't. Instead, it's a prequel. An origin story for Captain Nemo, here going by his original Indian name from the book, Count Dakar, though otherwise our location has very little to do with India. Rather, it takes place in a Ruritanian somewhere with a touch of Russia. Dakar is a pacifist, obsessed with the ocean depths and the 2 submarines he's building to explore it. He's found evidence of intelligent humanoids far below on the ocean floor. Dakar lives with a substantial workforce on an island just off the mainland, here implied to be the mysterious one of the title. There, he pays far too little attention to local politics, and to his clearly evil friend Baron Fallon, who plans to overthrow the already oppressive government, and Fallon can imagine what a couple of armed underwater crafts could do for his battle plans. Fallon has a more carnal interest in Dakar's sister, Countess Sonia, an unusually powerful female character, and his aristocratic standards are upset when he sees the Countess is fond of the touch of a commoner, the chief engineer of the subs. This leads to betrayal, violence, torture, romance, encounters with merfolk and giant sea creatures, and death. There's a lot going on in a brief 93 minutes, and it's amazing it was finished. About those complications. MGM started production in 1926 as a fully silent film with Maurice Tourneur, father of Jacques Tourneur of Cat People and I Walked with a Zombie fame, at the helm in Hollywood, and Ernest and George Williamson, whose underwater cinematography for 1916's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was groundbreaking, in the Bahamas for the underwater scenes. But with script rewrites, the Williamsons didn't get the go-ahead until months later than they expected, into hurricane season, where multiple hurricanes destroyed equipment, just the start of extra expenses for this film. And in the end, almost none of their work made it into the picture, a picture that bore almost no resemblance to the movie they set out to make. Tourneur bristled under studio control, and the studio bristled under Tourneur's generally getting nothing done. He left the project, one way or another, returning to France. Some of his footage remained in the film, but he wasn't credited. Benjamin Christensen, the Danish director of Haxan, took over, and also fiddled about, shooting some film in 26 or 27. It's not clear what, and he also isn't credited. The studio then gave the director's chair to non-director Lucien Hubbard, who was the screenwriter and often a producer, though not in this case. I can't say how much of the finished footage was directed by him, but certainly the retakes, and most of the film is retakes. So the project was delayed by script problems, the already mentioned weather, issues with the 2-strip Technicolor, complexities with the special effects, and eventually, sound. For that last one, the powers that be decided it would be too much to remake the whole film as a talkie. This movie was going to be Frankenstein together. Werner Oland, known for Charlie Chan, was not available for those reshoots. Or the studio didn't like his accented voice, which is a kind of unavailable. So his entire part, that of the villain, had to be reshot with Montague Love. But here the studio got lucky, as both lead Lionel Barrymore and Love had good speaking voices and enough stage experience not to fall into the halting speech patterns that studios were actually teaching their actors to use.
This adventure.
Are you frightened?
I? Oh, I don't know what fear is, but I'm shocked.
Tell me, what impressed you most about it down there?
The heat, man. I thought you were taking me into the very depth of hell.
That's it.
Sure, Barrymore overacts, but then he always overacted. And less so here than as Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life. With all the changes, delays, and problems, it's surprising that the result is a coherent story. No, it doesn't match the book, but then I doubt anyone was crying out for a meticulous procedural on island survival. The 1961 adaptation added women and Ray Harryhausen's monsters to drum up some interest. Hubbard took the more direct approach of just using his own plot. And considering all the issues with the photography, I'd have never thought it would look good, yet it does. The two-strip Technicolor on the island creates a beautiful fantasy land, while the tinted frames in the depths set the mood. You should notice that you're not seeing that right now. All those wonderful colors do exist, but not on my 2019 Warner Archive DVD. So for home viewing at the moment, we're stuck with shades of gray. While a lot of money was wasted, a lot is also seen on screen. The sub-interiors are substantial and intricate, with some very practical-looking diving suits. And the undersea kingdom has scope, with at times hundreds of duck-billed little aliens. Both little people and children were hired to play the sea people. There's also an attacking octopus, a real octopus, which looks as good as such effects did 30 years later, as well as a dinosaur played by an alligator with fins attached. I could do without that kind of animal use, but it continued to be done into the 60s, and looks as good here as it ever did. The Mysterious Island was a huge flop. I've heard numbers for the final budget between $1.5 and $4 million. That's an obscene amount of money for a movie at the time, and it made roughly $100,000. Critics liked it, but audiences were looking for regular people speaking for an entire movie, so skipped it. Though I can't imagine any way MGM could have made their money back, the film was too expensive. And is so often the case, Hollywood learned the wrong lesson. Metropolis had been a flop, The Mysterious Island was a flop, and in 1930 Just Imagine would be a flop. So by Hollywood logic, science fiction didn't pay, and outside of horror, the genre would disappear for 20 years. England would try in 36 with Things to Come, which also flopped. Some people try to add High Treason to the group of films that killed science fiction, but it was a penny-ante operation compared to The Mysterious Island, and no one in Hollywood even noticed it. Which brings me to my final nominee, Woman in the Moon, which sidestepped the problems with sound, or partial sound, by being a fully silent film. Artistically, a good decision, though not so much financially. It's a beautifully shot science fiction, spy, thriller, romance, melodrama. And of course it is, as it was directed by Fritz Lang, between Metropolis and M, and that's where his mind flowed at the time. This film had the same writer as Metropolis, Lang's then-wife, Theo Van Harbo. Like that earlier masterpiece, Woman in the Moon looks good. Though it lacks a fantastical world, the setting is 1929, so the art direction is fine, but don't get too excited. He wasn't given the kind of money to do what he had done before, though I can't figure why UFA kept financing him at all. Well, this was the last time. He'd have to go elsewhere to make M. In general, kinda, the film can be described as being a trip to the moon by 6 individuals. Industrialist and main character Helios, his best friend and engineer Windiger, Frida, who is Windiger's fiancée, and whom Helios is not so secretly in love with, an evil spy, a stowaway child, and a professor. Woman in the Moon is known as the first serious cinematic examination of space travel. It predicts a 3-stage rocket, discusses escape velocity, deals with zero gravity, and apparently invented the countdown. Before this film, real rocket experimentation used a count up to a selected number. It was a favorite film of Nazi rocket scientists. Yeah, you can't escape Nazis when discussing German films of this era. And was later banned in Germany, with all of its models destroyed because it was considered too accurate to actual missile development. Its scientific advisor, Dr. Hermann Oberth, was supposed to make a working rocket as a publicity stunt, but that didn't pan out. More historically interesting is that Oberth's research was a foundation for much of rocket development going forward, while his protege, one Werner von Braun, was the major designer of the German V-2 rocket. Later, Oberth and von Braun, with von Braun now in the senior position, worked in the US space program. Yeah, there's a reason why the rocket launch looks so good. No one, in 1929, could design a better rocket launch than Oberth. The 6 characters moving around the spaceship is pretty impressive too, as they deal with zero gravity. They also play with it a bit, which is a nice touch. Of course, the film got a lot wrong, such as everyone wearing street clothes for space travel. I found the control setup amusing. Everyone lays on a bed for takeoff to deal with G-forces, but Helios and Windiger still have to throw some switches so they awkwardly twist around. Other elements were known to be wrong at the time, like the moon having mountains of gold, and more importantly, it having an atmosphere. But then, this was a fantasy film, and while it does have an important place in the development of screen science fiction isn't the main focus of the film. It's nearly an hour and a half till we get to the rocket, out of 2 hours and 49 minutes total. The first 25 minutes is an introduction to the professor. There's some exposition in there dealing with his belief in moon gold, but mostly it's character. Then the film switches to a spy drama as a consortium of business executives send their thugs and killers to steal the plans and blackmail our hero into taking their agent along on the space flight. Their goal is the control of international finance. A second film of evil financiers. And yeah, it's hard not to see anti-Semitism here. But that's not the real story either. Woman in the Moon is first and foremost a love triangle. This isn't a film about going to the moon for adventure or to expand human knowledge. Helios just wants to go somewhere where he won't have to watch Windiger and Frida necking, and that backfires when they insist on coming along. Once on the moon, the film switches into being an adventure survival picture. Well, under the love triangle, that's always first. And when the love triangle is sorted out, the movie ends. There was a US cut of the film made sometime after 1931 that was 95 minutes long. I'm quite curious about it, but haven't been able to find it. Woman in the Moon had a lot of influence, good and bad. It was a huge morale boost to Nazi scientists who loved it, and it was a motivating factor for several to get into the field. It also had an effect on future hard or hardish science fiction films and stories. 1936's Soviet space film Cosmic Voyage and 1950's Destination Moon clearly cribbed from this. It might only be a small section of this film, but this is where realistic spaceflight in films began. So, with these nominees, which is the best fantasy or science fiction film of 1929? None of these are great films. Great films were a rarity in 29. Again, the worst year in feature film history. Even good films are rare. This is going to take some deliberation. I'm going to be a bit rougher on these than I'll normally be, for obvious reasons. So, High Treason. As mentioned, it's a British take on Metropolis. A cheap British take. And you can't make Metropolis on the cheap. That was an astronomically expensive film. This isn't, and you can tell. The art direction is solid, if a bit familiar, but that's not enough. The miniature work looks like toys, which would be less of a problem if something else, anything else, was carrying the film. Many of the failings of new talkies are on display. Rough, uneven sound, stilted dialogue, unnatural acting, characters grouped to be near a microphone. The camera work isn't bad for the time, which is a backhanded compliment. Better than average, but far behind what Lang did in Woman in the Moon. The silent version may not contain the actual poor sound, but it looks the same, with the addition of too many title cards. I could forgive some of that if the characters weren't so underdeveloped while being so overwrought. For our two leads, he's a soldier, that's it. She wants peace, that's all she is. They have no other traits. There's no way these two should be together, and the film gives us nothing, not a thing, to counter that. They are both non-entities who are simultaneously very silly. They either needed to be dialed way back, or it all turned into a comedy, which at times it is far too close to. That would have been the only way to save this, a satire. But it is earnest, painfully earnest, while completely lacking the grand mythic qualities which allowed Metropolis to pull off such serious messaging. As for The Mysterious Island, it's a part talkie, which was never a good idea. I'm sure it would have been better as a pure silent picture. Thing is, while shoving sound into a silent picture was generally fatal, The Mysterious Island manages to avoid the worst problems. Having talking segments early eliminates the assault on immersion that normally greets silent characters who suddenly speak after an hour, and having the sound effects include crowd noises and a sung hymn again normalizes talking. When there isn't speech, there's still noise. Gunshots, hammers banging, horses' hooves splashing, all of which makes the talking and non-talking segments flow together decently. Sure, another backhanded compliment, but it is a compliment. Also, using speech for the radio was quite clever to have it stand out.
This is Sonia! Escaped!
And since it is partly silent, we get a musical score, which is a huge advantage over most full talkies in 29. So, within the limitations of what it is, this is a rip-roaring adventure film. It's just a lot of fun, with a very satisfying conclusion, and more so for anyone familiar with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. This might not have been Verne's backstory for Captain Nemo, but it should have been. For Woman in the Moon, the length is a killer, 169 minutes. Sit down with someone and show it to them, and they won't be talking about the semi-accurate space travel, but asking when it will end. That leisurely introduction to the professor would be fine if this was a buddy movie with him and Helios, But the professor is the sixth most important character in the film. He disappears for the next hour. That entire section could be cut to 5 minutes. As for the spy plot, we never see or hear from the Illuminati later in the film, and there's no follow-up to their desire to control Earth's gold reserves. So with that basis gone from the film, all that spy stuff is fun for a bit, but eventually it wore me out, as it does most viewers, both now and back in the day, and is completely unnecessary. Meaning, not only is this film long, but it could and should have been cut by over an hour. Yeah, the sci-fi rocket material is good, but that's a tiny fraction of the film, and even that isn't all good, as once they get into space, the characters fall apart. Frida becomes depressed being off of Earth. It's only been a few hours. Wendiger becomes cowardly, really cowardly, about everything. And the professor, who was a touch unstable before, goes insane and gets comedy gold fever. The kid is the only one who acts reasonably. And remember, this is first and foremost a love triangle film, not a space epic, meaning we need to care about the lovers, and I've never heard of anyone who does. The acting doesn't help. There's a lot of acting. Not quality acting, but quantity. Way too much acting. Woman in the Moon is the best shot of these three pictures, clearly, but it matters what you are shooting. Variety's review mirrors my own thoughts. The rocket trip to the moon is surrounded by a hackneyed melodramatic frame and a bedraggled romance, and it's way too long for its present footage. Which means my choice for best science fiction or fantasy film of 1929 is The Mysterious Island. It's a solid adventure romp with likable characters, engaging special effects, and a pleasing plot. It's flawed, but this is 1929, and I find myself returning to this more often than almost any of my other silents. Almost. I'll be back with the best fantasy and science fiction films for other years. And please like and subscribe, as that'll help me immensely.